Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme I'll be talking to Bollywood star Shilpa Shetty and to the Foreign Minister of Argentina. But our first topic is Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair. This week Mr Blair announced that he will step down as the UK's Prime Minister next month. He made the announcement surrounded by friends and supporters in his North of England constituency. Mr Blair's political opponents claim one issue will dominate his legacy, Iraq. It's still the intention of the British government to begin withdrawing a minority of its troops from Iraq in the next few months. It'll be down to Mr Blair's successor, most likely to be Chancellor Gordon Brown, to decide exactly how and when. The leader of Britain's third party, Menzies Campbell of the Liberal Democrats, has been a staunch opponent of the war, and he still is, and he's with me now. Ming, welcome. May I preface talking about Iraq with one question, which is, what are the things that you think that Tony Blair did well? What were the good points?
Well, I think if you take his first parliament, his first 5 years, he certainly engaged in some reform of government in this country by allowing devolution to Scotland and to Wales. He was part of the economic stability which came from making the Bank of England independent. He offered us a Freedom of Information Act which allowed us to know what happens inside the workings of government. The early Blair was very sound. The difficulty is that Iraq, as you rightly say, was a decision he made early in his second period as Prime Minister, and that has inevitably coloured that period and also all of the good things that he'd done before.
And in terms of Iraq, I mean, why do you think it's gone so wrong? Was it mistaken actually to go in at all, or was it just really mistaken not prepared for the aftermath?
Well, I think the answer to the question is it was both. I mean, I was wholly against the military action. I don't believe it had proper legal validity. The United Nations was usurped. It was based upon a flawed prospectus, the presence of weapons of mass destruction, which were never proved to be there. It was taken against the background of the inspection still going on with Dr. Al-Baradi and Hans Blix, still inspecting, still saying, we are able to do the job you've asked us to do. And then, of course, when you add to that the failure to plan properly for what should happen afterwards, which reflected, I think, a contest or a conflict within the United States administration in which the Pentagon managed to sideline the State Department. And a lot of the current
difficulties... And the State Department have claimed since, privately and so on, that they had real plans for immediately after the war,
indeed.
But unfortunately they lost out.
Yeah, it was the, if you like, the precedence that Donald Rumsfeld was able to take over Colin Powell.
And so your policy now would be to go further, faster in terms of withdrawal of troops than Britain is said to do.
What we said at the end of January of this year was, look, we should have 3 months in which we consult with our allies in the coalition, which we consult with the countries of the region, because none of them has any interest in Iraq being dismembered, in Iraq breaking up. But then we should say, beginning on what would have been the 1st of May, over a period until the end of October, a framework for withdrawal, at the end of which all of Britain's troops would have been withdrawn. Now, you can't keep to that timetable because we didn't start it
at the right originally time. You said by October,
By October. But we needed this 3-month discussion period and then the beginning of the drawdown.
So that you would point now to a date next year?
Well, I think it's got to be 3 months on. Let's say by now our timetable would slip probably to the end of December. But what I think is vitally important is that we set a date, we set a target. And what is interesting, of course, is this is exactly what the Democrats are now doing in both the Senate and the House of Representatives in the United States. And according to some reports, it's something that even senior Republicans who supported President Bush are beginning to do privately.
But in terms of moving out, what about those people who say, and maybe they're not necessarily a majority at all, but who say that to withdraw troops too speedily, particularly around Basel where the British have been focused and so on, those people who say that that could endanger the lives of Iraqis?
Sooner or later we're going to have to withdraw. We've now been present for more than 4 years. And what we know is that a majority of the people of Iraq believe the coalition should go. And there's even a majority of people in Iraq who believe that coalition forces are legitimate targets. Now, of course, even people like me who were, as you rightly said, implacably opposed to this war, accepted a moral obligation once we had taken that action. But there's a limit to how long that moral obligation can't be open-ended. And we have a moral obligation to our own young men and women, nearly 150 of whom have been killed in Iraq. The Iraqi people have got to take responsibility for themselves, sooner or later. And I believe that time has come. I think we should recognise we, Britain, have done all that we can, and now it's over to the people of Iraq themselves.
And do you think that the policy, Britain's policy towards Iraq, will undergo any change if Gordon Brown takes over as Prime Minister?
I suspect it will. Because I think, rather referring to what I said about the United States a moment or two ago, I think we're now in the end game here. Because I don't believe the Republicans will want to fight the next presidential election in the United States, whoever their candidate is, with the same commitment in terms of men and women and money and all the rest of it, and politics too, in Iraq that they have at the moment. And with the pressure of the Democrats, having done so well in the November elections, then I think we're coming towards the end of coalition involvement. Quite when and how that's going to take place is still difficult to point to. I think Gordon Brown would be very much alive to that, and he'd want to make sure that his government was, if you like, in the vanguard, in the forefront of that, rather than being seen to tag along after the United States.
Ming, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we'll come back and comment on these great matters again soon.
As often as you ask me.
Thank you very much. Ming Campbell there, taking a look at the future of Iraq and, I suppose, the future of Britain too. In a moment, I'll be talking to the Foreign Minister of Argentina, an interesting and impressive character. That's after this short break.